Jessica Vitalis, have you ever seen a flying saucer and or a ghost?
Well, I cannot say that I've ever seen a flying saucer, but I do have a very interesting ghost story.
Go on.
Before I moved to Canada, we lived in Atlanta, Georgia, specifically in Decatur, a very small sort of town within the city limits of Atlanta. And we lived in a 100-year-old bungalow. That was sort of one of those delightful bungalows that has all the little nooks and crannies and crevices that you would expect in a 100-year-old bungalow, and the stained glass windows, and nothing untoward had ever happened that I had seen. Nothing had ever made me uncomfortable in that bungalow until we were getting ready to move to Canada. I think maybe it was even when my husband flew up here to interview. I was alone in the bedroom, sound asleep in the middle of the night, and I startled awake, and there was a young woman standing beside my bed in a white floor-length lace nightgown. And I could see her very, very clearly. And I didn't have the sense that she wanted to hurt me, but I was terrified because the sense of somebody else being in the room with me was so real. Like I felt like I could reach out and touch this person standing next to my bed. And I was genuinely absolutely terrified, so scared that I turned on the light and I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. And that feeling when you're really scared of something stayed with me for several weeks. That feeling of this person was in my house. And it didn't last long. It only lasted long enough for me to reach over and turn on the light. But I always look back on that and I'm like, was I just in that twilight place in between dreaming and being awake? But even dreams don't usually have quite that intensity to them. So I don't know, maybe it was a ghost, maybe it was just a dreamlike state, but it was a really, really intense experience.
So having had that experience, do you live in fear of it happening again, or does it give you some kind of comfort in knowing that, oh, clearly death is not the end? I hope I'm having a better experience than hanging out, scaring people at the foot of the there might be something beyond I could be doing.
You know, I was uncomfortable in that bedroom for some time afterward, but it really hasn't bothered me since. I don't know. Maybe it was something connected to that house. I live in a much newer house now, and I don't know what the history of that house was, but maybe that was some energy connected to that house. I don't know.
Well, there's a home buyer's tip that I feel that they should put on train realtors. Buy newer properties, less likely to be haunted.
Isn't there some law? I don't know if it's every state, but I know I've lived in at least one state where it's a law that you have to disclose if somebody died in the house. Have you ever heard that before?
I know that that's the premise of several books and TV shows. There are a couple of states with that law. I know it's not here in Indiana because I bought my house and then afterward found out who died here. I was like, I hadn't told you that, but I guess not.
Interesting.
Seems like I should have Googled that up front, although we haven't had any, knock on wood, we haven't had any paranormal experiences. So
interesting. It could still happen. You never know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sooner or later, I've got to write another horror novel, and I'm always looking for ideas. So it would not go wasted.
That's fantastic. I do think maybe someday I'll write a ghost story. We'll see.
Have you got a candy craving for one?
Maybe a little bit.
Is that going to be that second companion novel, the title of which is?
Not going to happen. That was a nice try, though. I will give you one little nugget. I will say the world building is completely different than The Wolf's Curse, but exactly the same sort of world building. So very unique setting, very in-depth world building, same sort of magical feel, but the exact opposite.
And the anticipated release date where a Steve audience will be able to mark it on their calendar is?
Fall of 2022. We won't have an exact date until later this year.
Fair enough. So everyone should be checking out your social media, your website to be keeping tabs for when that announcement's going to drop.
Absolutely.
If they wanted to do that, where would they go?
They can find me on Twitter at Jessica Vitalis or on Instagram at Jessica V Author. And then I also have an author page on Facebook with the same name, Jessica V Author. And then you can find me and Magic in the Middle at www.jessicavitalis.com.
Jessica, this has been an absolute pleasure. I so appreciate you making the time. I've got one last question, and
Sure.
we'll call it a night. But my last, but thank you again for making the time, for being such a wonderful guest. My last question is always some variation of, if you could go back 13 years ago, the start of your career, the middle of your career, wherever it would have been useful, and give yourself some advice other than watch out where you're sleeping. The ghosts come around. Give yourself some advice about writing that maybe would have made your path easier. It might make easier the path of all those watching or listening to us right now. What would you go back and tell yourself?
I think I would try to teach myself that readers don't care about the plot. The plot is something that carries the character along, but readers really fall in love with characters. And so the more time you invest in helping the readers to care about your characters, the more emotional impact your book is going to have. And that took me a long time to learn. So that's something I wish I had figured out a whole lot earlier.